All right. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the October 2021 Hawk presentation. Thank you for joining us tonight. You know, Habitat and Wildlife Keepers is part of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. Been around for 15, going on our 16th year. Started by a group of environmentalists and naturalists that really wanted to do the right thing. And lo and behold, they adopted Squirrel Lake Park well before it looked this pretty. Matter of fact, it is this is an older picture. It has grown up tremendously since then, and it was certified as a habitat of exceptional quality by the National Wildlife Federation, just a couple of years after Hawk started. In fact, we're having a Kids in Nature Day coming up over at Squirrel Lake Park in just a week and a half. So come join us October 16th. I'll have a slide about that in just a moment. Going to learn all about certifying your yard. It's very simple. Just 4 little things: food, water, shelter, place to raise young, and a little 5th thing, which is to go ahead and not use chemicals, or if you're gonna, very sparingly. So I mentioned that we are a volunteer organization. We've got a couple of things that we're quite proud of. Kids in Nature Day in October. It's our October version of Earth Day, which we do in April. Hopefully we'll be able to do Earth Day again. So very excited to be able to get together for October this year. You can sign up and volunteer at that bit.ly link that you see on your screen. We are getting Squirrel Lake Park ready for everybody the week before. So Sunday, the 10th at 9 a.m., come join us with your pruners and gloves, bring some water, and come help us get the garden looking pretty, get mulch all out there. And join us to be on our leadership team as well, getting presentations like this together, getting refreshments when we can get together again in person. We have basically any level of volunteer that you're willing to give us. We'd love to have you come join us. Appreciate it. So I mentioned Kids in Nature Day on October the 16th, 10 to 1. It'll be fun activities for the family, not just the kids. So come and enjoy, and or you can even volunteer to help us man one of our booths. Of course, we know that all these things have been programmed in everybody's mind to go ahead and eradicate, but this is bird food. So please take care of them. Enjoy these bugs. And if you want one of the best books out there on that concept, Doug Tallamy, he presented for us 6 years ago. In person, he presented for us last September actually, last year. All about a book that he's got. He's got 3 fantastic books. If you don't know them, go out and get them. But you can see his presentation at our website. Is the link to actually all our presentations since COVID started. We've been recording them, so feel free to share those as well. See his presentation there. Love to thank all of our sponsors: Birdhouse on the Greenway, Wildology, William Suber, and here more recently, Home Depot has donated to help us get Squirrel Lake Park together next week. So thanks to them as well for helping us out. You know, next month we have a special guest, one of our very own, Carol Bowie Jackson, who has quite the illustrious career in being a naturalist. She is the owner of Birdhouse on the Greenway as well as Wildology. And she's going to talk to us about winter feeding of wildlife, as well as the notion of leaving the leaves. And so it can't wait another month. The leaves are already falling now. So let all your neighbors know to gently push all those leaves into a natural area. They make great mulch. And it is what all these insects, so many rather, overwinter in there. So encourage folks to save their back, save the rake, just toss those leaves in a nice natural area in their yard. So tonight, we are quite fortunate. Carol is going to go ahead and introduce Justin McVey, as well as let us know about a little elk experience that she's had as well. There you are.
Hi there. Thank you, Daniel. Yes, I wanted to give everybody a little story about how I discovered the elk in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. A few years ago, my husband and I were celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary, and I was trying to recreate as many of our dates. We met and married in Denver, Colorado, and on one of our dates, Jay had taken me to the Rocky Mountain National Park to experience the elk there in the park during rutting season. It was September, and it was just magnificent. It was the first time I had ever been exposed to something like that. So I wanted to see how I could recreate that, and got in touch with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, Tim Gaswicki, and said, where can I see elk here? And hopefully Justin's going to go into the role that the North Carolina Wildlife Federation played in helping reintroduce the elk back into the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. So it was a mystery date for Jay. I took him up there. I think it was like the last weekend in September, or maybe the first weekend in October. Went to the visitor center at the Cherokee entrance to the park. It is, they wanted to remind me that it's not Disney World. The show doesn't start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon every day, but it's hit or miss. But we were very fortunate that there's a big field behind the visitor center there, and the elk start coming down in the afternoon, and you get to see the display of the males as they are fighting for their harems. And you hear the bugling all up. You can see them bugling, and then you can hear elk that you can't see out in the woods bugle as well. And it's just a magical experience. So I really highly recommend for anyone who is interested in the experience to please go. There's another location, and I'm sure Justin is going to talk about that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Justin, but I want to introduce him. He's got the job that I want to be when I grow up. He's the Mountain Regional District Wildlife Biologist for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. And just so you distinguish between the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, we're a nonprofit that is in no way a state agency. The North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission is a state agency. So Justin works for the state, and the Wildlife Resources Commission is tasked with managing our game lands and our game species. So Justin has a Bachelor of Science degree in zoology from North Carolina State University. He's also obtained his Master of Science in Wildlife and Conservation Biology from NC State as well, studying the food habits of coyotes and red wolves in eastern North Carolina. Justin, we may have you back to talk about that. He's been employed by the Wildlife Resources Commission since 2005. He's been holding positions of the captive cervid biologist, wildlife technician, permits biologist, and then his recent position of district wildlife biologist, which is managing the western 12 counties of North Carolina. His duties include providing technical guidance to landowners regarding wildlife, technical assistance regarding nuisance wildlife, development and review of hunting and trapping regulations, and the monitoring of the wildlife populations, including the management of North Carolina's elk herd on private and public land. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to you, Justin. And do I need to do anything to make sure he can share his screen?
Nope, he's all set.
Okay, all right, excellent.
But he is muted. There he is.
Now there we go. Well, I was saying I was hitting all the buttons trying to wait for things to work, and eventually got it. Still not used to this Zoom world that we live in right now. So thank you folks for having me. Excited to talk about elk. If you would told me 20 years ago that I would be an elk biologist, I would have laughed at you if you had told me that I was going to be an elk biologist, or part of my job was going to be an elk biologist in North Carolina. I would have laughed even harder. So today I'm going to kind of give you the overall elk story for North Carolina. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. At the end, I guess we should have some time for questions if I miss anything. So I guess let's go ahead and get started here. So historically, we did have elk in North Carolina. You can see from this map, this was the Eastern Elk Range Eastern Elk Range in the United States. And elk were extirpated in North Carolina around the 1780s. And it was the typical story when you see extirpations of over harvest, lack of habitat, those types of things. So you guys are from kind of all over, but just to kind of give you the basics of what elk really are. They're giant herbivores. A bull elk can weigh about 1,000 pounds, with cows weighing around 700 pounds. A typical healthy cow, prime, about 5.5 to 7.5 years old, probably weighs in the range of 600, but they can reach up to that 700 pounds. They are grass obligate species, so that means that they do rely on grass for a majority of their diet. They also eat forbs, and they also, however, are a little bit different than deer in that they browse a little bit more, and so they kind of get a little bit of everything in their diets. Rut is occurring right now, so we are kind of in the middle, starting to head towards the end, but rut, which is that peak breeding season, typically occurs here in North Carolina from late September to mid-October. And that's the time that's really exciting to come observe elk. You see the males gathering their harems. As Carol mentioned, you hear the bugling going on. It's just an exciting time to observe these majestic creatures. Antlers are humongous. They are 40 pounds. Again, some of this stuff I'm telling you guys, you already know it, so forgive me, but those antlers that drop every single year and have to be regrown, they regrow 40 pounds of antlers every single year. That's just an amazing task. And they can live up to 20 years. That's a little longer than the typical lifespan, but we do still have some pretty old elk on the landscape. We still have some of the original elk that were reintroduced back in 2001 or 2002 that are still around the area. Gestation, 240 to 262 days, which means now is the rut. They're going to be giving birth in May and June. May is kind of the hot time where we see a lot of those births. Here you got a picture of a cow and her calf. The calf has a collar around its neck. If you're wondering what that is, it's an expandable collar as part of a project that the National Park Service is ongoing and doing and tracking reproduction of cows. So how did elk get here? So we already mentioned that elk were extirpated in late 1700s, and then over the years there's been several attempts and requests and thoughts about reintroducing. The National Park Service decided that they wanted to see if restoring elk was going to be a feasible option. And so in 2001 and in 2002, they did that reintroduction. They got a total of 52 elk, 25 from Land Between the Lakes, which is in Kentucky, 27 from Elk Island National Park in Canada, and they released those elk in the Cataloochee area of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Now, interestingly, even those 25 that were from Land Between the Lakes in Kentucky originally came from Elk Island National Park in Canada. Since the eastern elk has been extirpated, they tried to find the closest relative that they could, and that was the Manitoban subspecies. So here in the landscape now, we have Cervus elaphus manitobensis. This is kind of just a general overview of the area. That blue polygon is the overall elk range. with Cataloochee kind of being centrally located. You can see Asheville there to the east, and Knoxville, up to the upper left there. So kind of give you an idea of where elk are at right now. And if we zoom in on that a little closer, you can kind of see the different jurisdictions and areas that elk inhabit right now. The gray areas and the green areas are areas that North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission handles. That's your state agency that's responsible for natural resources. The purpley pink area is Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and the tannish area at the bottom there is the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian, and that's the reservation down there. So elk don't know boundaries. They at this point move all across those different boundaries, and we work together to manage these animals. So back in 2001 or 2002, when the National Park Service reintroduced these elk, they were in an experimental period. Basically, they wanted to find out, could elk survive in this area? Could they reproduce? Could they be successful? And so during this time, all management of elk that were in the park, or if the elk walked outside of the park, were all handled by the National Park Service. So sometimes we had nuisance situations, and somebody would complain about elk being on their property, and the National Park Service handled all of that during this time. Around 2007, the National Park Service decided that, hey, this project, this experiment worked, that elk can be on the landscape, they can successfully reproduce. And then at that point, they kind of handed over the reins to the respective jurisdictions. So on the reservation, Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians kind of takes care of the management there. National Park Service still handles all management within Great Smoky Mountain National Park boundaries. And the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission handles everything else. And so fast forward 20 years, and the picture is a lot different than it was in 2001 and 2002. Elk are pretty adaptable. They've moved into neighborhoods and residential areas, as well as being on Forest Service land and other lands. But this is pretty typical. These pictures are from the town of Maggie Valley, a pretty common sight to see these gigantic creatures kind of roaming around and getting into sometimes places they shouldn't be getting into. Originally, we had a range, and you can see in red, and I literally just drew a random line and kind of think, well, I'm trying to encompass all where elk could be. In 2018, kind of shrunk that area down a little bit to more accurately reflect where elk actually are. Still a really big area, about 75,000 square miles. So a really, really big swath of land. And although we do get elk periodically, typically during the summer, that leave this area, this is the core area of the elk in North Carolina. I've already mentioned several times National Park Service and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian, and it's a really interesting and unique relationship that I get to have. And that's because, we have these three entities, we're all managing the same elk herd. And so because of that, we formed this working group back when I started in 2012. And, we were kind of putting our heads together to solve some issues or answer some questions that we might have. So things like mortality, who's responsible if something dies, how do we take care of that? Sharing information and experience about nuisance elk issues. How did you guys handle this issue when an elk was in a garden or whatever? And then probably more importantly, we were really interested in that population estimate, and we're going to go into that a little bit more later on. But everybody always wants to know how many elk are here, and so we're really kind of digging in, trying to figure that out. So here's just a couple of pictures of us cooperatively working. Up in the top, we've got Wildlife Commission staff, we've got park staff. Down in the bottom right is a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian. biological staff that was helping us work up some elk. I do something
Sorry
wrong?
about that. Let me mute that. Lynn, will you turn your camera off, please?
All right, just took me for a surprise there. So anyway, so we've worked really well with one another over the years to just to handle all sorts of different situations and learn from one another. So it's been 20 years. What issues are there to overcome? And this really kind of gets into the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and that one of the biggest things that we've had to overcome is habitat. As I mentioned, elk are a grass obligate species. While they use the woods, they use those mature forests, they also need that open land, they need that early successional habitat. And unfortunately, in North Carolina, or in Western North Carolina, that's not really something that we have a whole lot of. So we've worked with partners like the North Carolina Wildlife Federation to enhance, to grow, to get more of that habitat. This is actually a field that North Carolina Wildlife Federation helps us out with and leases, and you can see it's really widely used. You can see down in the bottom corner, we've got an orange collar on one of those elk as part of some of our ongoing research projects. So one of the things that the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission did, we realized that habitat was a limiting factor. And again, working with other partners, we were able to acquire about 2,500 acres of land to enroll into our game land program. And that allowed us to manage specifically for elk. Now, the great thing about managing for elk, and I mean managing habitat for elk, the great thing about making elk habitat is that everything likes elk habitat. So providing that early successional habitat is not only beneficial to elk, but it's also beneficial to deer, turkey, bear, golden winged warblers. You name it, they like it. And as I mentioned, we don't have a lot of that early successional habitat here. So it was just a great opportunity. This was a really unique, several parcels of land that were purchased at separate times. And you can see up in that upper right-hand portion, there's some long squiggly lines. That portion was actually slated to be a ski resort, and the developer had already come in and cut ski slopes in there. So, kind of did some of our job for us, although it was a little more long and linear than we normally use. But anyway, this is a great platform and start place for creating elk habitat. And this is located in the Maggie Valley area. Just north of it is the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And just for reference, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian and all that tribal land is just to the west there, a couple miles. So not only on this tract of land, but also around 2012 when I started was the time that the U.S. Forest Service was looking at making revisions to their forest plan. Another thing that the North Carolina Wildlife Federation helped out in, because they were there, they were partners, they were advocating for creating habitat for wildlife. They realized that we had a lot of mature forests. We didn't have a lot of early successional habitat. And through those efforts and, along with other partners, we were able to start some projects, start actually getting some wildlife habitat on the ground. This is just one project where we went in and kind of cleared out some of the understory, some of the smaller unproductive trees in an effort to get more sunlight to the floor. More sunlight to the floor means more plants grow, that's more food, and that's what all wildlife species, including elk, are really after. A mature forest only provides a food source this time of year when they're dropping acorns. So having these more open areas is very beneficial. This is some work on the Silvers game land. Our agency has multiple divisions. One of those divisions is called Land and Water Access, and those are the folks that are boots on the ground actually getting the habitat work done. And that bottom picture is actually one of those ski slopes that that I spoke about earlier. You can see kind of as it goes up to the right there, that was one of the ski slopes that were coming down. There was also existing logging roads and other access roads that were on the property. We were able to hire contractors using some of our funds coupled with matching funds from people like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and we daylighted those roads, which just means we pushed out the sides, cut down the trees, and that allows more sunlight to hit the roadbed. And we can make all those long linear roads into linear wildlife openings. It's really if you build it, they will come, and that's for all wildlife. But we immediately saw a reaction from elk because they were in close proximity to this area. As soon as we started providing them palatable nutrition on the ground, they immediately came. So again, here's a couple more pictures of some daylighted logging roads that are working wonderfully. There's turkey there, there's bear there. You'll see deer, just everything uses it. That lower picture was one of our other projects, and this was the beginning stage where we reclaimed an existing wildlife opening on Forest Service land. And now it's messy and brushy, which is what wildlife really, really want. And you know, from the untrained eye, it may not look nice, but as a wildlife biologist, when I see that really brushy, kind of messy landscape, I realize that means there's food there, there's cover there, there's shelter there. So that's really encouraging to see. I get basically two questions. Well, I get three questions about elk. The first question is, we have elk in North Carolina, which, you know, makes me laugh, but I have to explain that. The second question I get is, how many elk do we have in the population? So we don't have any great way of estimating that population. What we've been relying on for years is something called a minimum count. And it's really basic, really rudimentary. And that's the Park Service, Eastern Band of Cherokee, Wildlife Commission staff. We get together on 2 consecutive days in the morning and in the evening, and we spread out and we literally just try to count as many elk as we can. You know, we live here, we know we're always around elk, so we kind of know where elk are. So we hit those spots, we try not to overlap each other, and we literally just count how many elk. So this past year, we counted 163. And, you know, I know that's not exactly right because, like I said, I've been here for a lot of years. I've been chasing elk and walking around. So I know that there's, specifically this year, I know there's one herd, little sub herd of about 12 to 14 animals that we didn't get our eyes on. So that's why I say, you know, right now our estimate of population is somewhere around 200 animals in Western North Carolina. This picture is taken to illustrate how difficult this task is. You know, in Western states, they get in planes and they can fly over and see things on the open plains or open landscape, but we have so much forest, it's really difficult. This picture was taken, there was actually an animal that was, an elk that was injured, had a radio collar. I was sitting in the truck with the VHF receiver, knew the elk was right there, but was having a really hard time actually seeing it. You know, the VHF receiver was just pinging. So I knew it was so close. I stepped out of the truck. I could smell the elk. I still couldn't see him. And in this picture, he's visible. I don't know if you guys can pick up on that. So I'll zoom in a little bit more, and under that red arrow, you'll see those antlers sticking up and just look like twigs or other rubbed trees. So again, that's just to kind of illustrate how hard it is to get an accurate estimate. So I mentioned, you know,
All right, Justin's internet connection looks like it is down for just a moment. We'll wait for him to pop back in here. Hopefully it won't take long. That is impressive to try and spot the elk in that picture. Had he not zoomed in, that'd be a tough one. While we're waiting for Justin to log back in, I did want to encourage everybody to use the Q&A button, not the chat button, to ask your questions. We'll have a Q&A session when Justin gets back online. So go ahead and load up the Q&A with all your questions that you've got that you want answered this evening. Of course, I know we're all accustomed to this new Zoom world that we live in, where internet connections fail at just the most inopportune times, right? Did want to point something out that he had mentioned when he was talking about the habitat, that from a wildlife biologist standpoint, that makes him happy is the very same things that a certified wildlife habitat of your backyard: food, water, shelter, and a place to raise young. So do look into that. If you haven't certified your yard, we'd love to help you. Don't hesitate to reach out to us on our website or through Facebook. Ask us any questions that you might have. Getting your yard certified and then having a sign and tell your neighbors why they should certify their yards and why they should do the things to help wildlife. Nice and simple. You don't need to go through all the efforts that the organizations that Justin was talking about went through to try and create habitat for the elk: food, water, shelter, and a place to raise young. And I know that Carol's going to be talking about that next month when she's talking about winter feeding of wildlife.
Yes, the birds and other wildlife need those 4 things year round, not just during nesting season. Justin realizes that his internet's down, so he's frantically working, trying to get right back on here. So also, I wanted just to, as a little incentive for this Sunday at Squirrel Lake Park, the work day, rumor has it that hot Krispy Kreme donuts around 10 o'clock. So just saying.
That's a good bribe. I'll take a donut or two, that's for sure. Justin, it looks like you're back on.
You guys hear me all right?
We can. All right.
Everybody still with me?
We are.
All right. Well, you missed
know
like 10 minutes of a really good presentation there. So sorry about that. Part of the wonderful thing about living in the woods is that you live in the woods, but the internet is not always reliable. Where did you guys lose me at? Somewhere around here?
The picture of the elk where you could only see the antlers that sort of look like twigs. That's where we lost you.
All right. Let me.
Where you could smell them, but you just couldn't see them. That was a real hiding spot that he had right there.
Well, and very impressive that you got the nose for elk too. So
it's not a hard trait to have, I promise.
Yeah.
All right. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, it's just not in full screen yet.
Gotcha. All right, we good? Okay.
Perfect.
So sorry about that, folks. So, basically these elk are hiding in plain sight, which kind of means it's tough to find them, tough to give an accurate count. So we've worked a lot with trying to figure out more information about elk. We've done some research. We put collars on elk pretty much as soon as I started. That was one of the things that I wanted to do. And through that, we've worked with some universities to create some habitat selection models, which helps us as land managers figure out exactly what the elk are liking, what they're using, what we need more of on the landscape. I've also kind of figured out some of that basic spatial ecology stuff of home range estimates, So through our collar work, we're looking at 24 square kilometers for cow, bulls about twice that at 27. And that's a lot bigger than the original estimates from the Park Service. So, the elk are definitely kind of expanding out and moving around a lot more than they did 20 years ago. Here's a picture of just some elk locations. These are multiple elk. Their collars are programmed to take a GPS location every 4 hours, and then it uploads to the satellite once a day. Some of the more interesting movements is if you can see the word Cataloochee there, see all those movements, and then you'll see that little trail of dots that moves up to the northeast. That happened to be a cow that we put a collar on in Cataloochee within the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. She moved all the way to I-40, hung out there for a couple of weeks, moved back to Cataloochee, and then all of a sudden she just made a beeline and just headed over, went through an underpass of a bridge there by I-40 and went over into the Harmon Den area. She took cows and other elk with her, and so now they have their own little sub-herd up in that northeast corner, and it doesn't appear that they really interact with any other elk. They just kind of hang out there. So just some of the neat stuff. And I actually kind of saw that real time and went out and I could see the hoof prints going under the bridge. So just pretty cool movement stuff. Some of the, so we talked about the population estimate, and everybody wants to know that. For us, yes, that population estimate is important, but there's also other metrics that are probably more important for us when we think about how the elk herd is doing. So looking at things like survival, things like recruitment and growth, those are really the things that we as wildlife managers want to know about. But that population estimate is also a part of that. Back probably in 2014, 2016, that elk working group, again, we were putting our heads together. We kind of come up with an idea of using fecal DNA in a capture-recapture method in order to estimate elk. We kind of did some pilot studies, just the 3 or 4 of us that were working together. And then when I approached the Wildlife Commission, all the big dogs in Raleigh, and said, hey, I need 50 technicians for 3 weeks, several times a couple times a year. They said, no, we're not going to do that. Let's farm this project out. And what we're getting is a much better project. So we came up with a project and funded the University of Tennessee and a PhD student to get us that population estimate as well as those other metrics. And the way they're doing it is this thing called spatially explicit capture-recapture methodology. And really, it's just a fancy term of saying they're going to use that collar data that we have and then also go out and pick up scat. And from that scat, you can get an individual animal. And then down the road, or maybe next year, you'll pick up scat and may have that individual animal again. And through that repeated capture, you can put that kind of into a big equation and get an estimate of how many animals are on the on the landscape. And what that's going to do, what we're hoping, is kind of compare that to what we see with our minimum count. Is it better? Is it more accurate? How close are we getting with just doing the regular old minimum count? It's a pretty intense project. So we have completed 2 field seasons of that, getting ready to enter our 3rd field season. What that research on the ground looks like is 410 transects, which are just straight lines. Some of those transects are 500 meters. Some of them are 1,500 meters. And, I get the distinct pleasure of going out to these locations, navigating to the start, and walking them in a straight line as I can for either 500 or 1,500 meters, and picking up any feces or scat that I find along the way, and then recording, all that data. It's not a walk in the park. It's a walk up, steep cliffs and rhododendron and mountain laurel. Some things are in pastures, but we've been, getting all 410 transects done using National Park Service staff, using Eastern Band of Cherokee staff, a lot of Wildlife Commission staff, as well as the grad student and a couple of technicians. So like I said, this January will be the third sampling period, start getting some results, putting all that stuff into the models. The models have already all been built. We just need more data to go into them, and we'll see where we go from there. So that's pretty exciting stuff. I really can't complain even about the transects in the middle of nowhere. It's better than being in an office. The other thing that I get questions a lot about is hunting. Everybody wants to know, are we going to have an elk season? When are we going to have an elk season? And a lot of people don't really understand the dynamics and the complexities of hunting elk. We have elk that don't intermingle with anybody else, these little subherds. We have elk that are in the National Park Service land, which no hunting is allowed. So there's a lot of factors there. But we did pass a rule back in 2016, and basically what we did was just set up the framework so that at some point we could have a season. We'll have all this framework ready to go. So you can read the rule there. But we also, when we passed this, we passed a resolution that said we're not going to have any elk hunting permits until we can make sure that the sustainability has been determined. The last thing that I want to do is kind of put the cart before the horse and start having hunting seasons when our population really can't sustain it. Along with this, a couple of years later, the governor signed off on a bill that created a resident and non-resident elk license. But I think all of us biologists on the ground, we're really, really conservative with this, and we don't want to push it. We want to make sure that we have enough elk. We want to have elk in the right places. We want to have them on U.S. Forest Service land or game lands, those types of places. So anyway, just kind of taking it slow. The population project that we're working with the UT is going to help a lot with this, and it'll give us more information on the viability of having a hunt in the future and then what that kind of looks like. So we're going to gain a lot of great information once that study is completed. We also have some other issues to overcome. Nuisance animals, I kind of alluded to that earlier, is an issue. If you have a 125-pound deer eating hostas in your yard compared to an 800-pound herbivore, it's a lot different. It's a lot bigger dinner plate. So we do have some issues with that. We try to work with landowners on ways to mitigate that damage or to stop that damage. You can't really move elk. They are going to come right back or do what they want. So that's not really an option. But we've had some issues over the years, but folks are generally kind of coming around, or they've just settled on that they're going to hate elk forever, and that's unfortunate. But the hopes are that if we have that habitat on public land, that elk can go there and kind of have that refuge where any mortality will be regulated by us, as opposed to having a landowner that might shoot an elk under the depredation rule. I've got to post a last slide here of this fella. When I first started in 2012, didn't know anything about elk, and this bull is the first elk that the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission and me ever darted and collared, so he was pretty special. Probably not supposed to tell this story, but I will. This particular elk hung out with another elk near a retirement home. At the time, this elk was pretty small, but the other elk was really, really big. And the folks at the retirement home called that other elk Majestic. And I just thought it was funny to name this elk Jeffrey. I like the juxtaposition of having this magnificent bull named Majestic and this little runt named Jeffrey. But Jeffrey grew up and kind of became a town legend. Everybody knew him. Had that orange collar on, and it's kind of like a proud papa, because as you can see here with his little herd, and I'm guessing his progeny, he was doing all right living in Maggie Valley and creating success for the elk program. So that's the end of my slide. With any, you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
All right, Carol's going to go ahead and moderate the questions, the Q&A that we have. Justin, thanks so much. That was fantastic. And I love this last slide of yours. I need to get a good the end slide myself. Awesome.
Oh my gosh, that is classic. Thank you so much. I do have a couple of questions. We had a question from someone in the on the Zoom call asking about the name Wapiti. And I guess some probably, I would think maybe Native Americans, but you'd know better. And just what are your thoughts about elk versus the name Wapiti?
It's just another name. Native Americans, especially Eastern Band of Cherokee, actually don't use Wapiti. They actually call elk Iwi Iwi. I think that's right. I may be totally messing that up, but deer is Iwi, and when in the Cherokee language, when something is bigger, to emphasize it, they just say it twice. So they just say Iwi Iwi. So that's the Native American name for elk here. But Wapiti is used, but it's really not very commonplace. Elk is pretty much what we use here. If you go to other countries, they have red stags, which are related, but not exactly the same. But here in America, it's just elk.
Okay. Also, you talked about the habitat that's needed, the early successional, I think you called it, and what y'all did to go through to make that habitat. Do you have to maintain that, or is the usage of the usage by the elk keeping it how it needs to be? Are you burning or bush hogging, or how are you maintaining that, or do you have to maintain it?
That's a great question. So we do have to maintain that. It was thought that elk, when they were originally here, they had enough of a presence to maintain like a bald by kind of eating it down and keeping it low. We've not seen that. There was a clear cut back in 2012 that elk really used, and that clear cut has grown up with a lot of poplars, and the elk don't use it quite as much. So there's just not enough elk density to keep the habitat down. So we will have to manage that habitat. Prescribed fire is definitely the way that we want to go. However, there's going to be, timber harvest, clear cuts. Those are all wildlife management practices that benefit wildlife that, are all on the table, or all things that are going to be used in the future. We're not going to go through and clear all the woods. We do little patchwork type stuff, but all those things will be managed. Bush hogging's not the best, but sometimes it's all we can do, just because we do live in a rainforest, and it's awfully hard to get good burning days here. But
right.
It will have to be maintained by humans.
Okay. All right. And someone's asking, how many calves per cow per season?
Oh goodness, that's really hard to tell. I mean, so most of our, unlike deer, elk generally just have a single calf. How many are actually on the landscape is pretty tough to tell. I was trying to think if I had any data on that. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so you can't see all my stuff, but
okay.
Give me just a second. I can get you that information. Ask you another question, and I'll come back to that one. How's that?
All right. So somebody wants to know, what does an elk smell like? I know the answer to that, but I'll let you answer it.
It doesn't smell good. They have glands on their back legs, and they pee down those tarsal glands to kind of mark their territory. So it's a combination of urine and those tarsal glands. It's funny, I don't mind the odor, but also when I handle elk, I am pretty careful not to stick my hands on those areas. I don't necessarily want that all over me.
Right. Well, and and when we were up there seeing the elk, and there were probably, I want to say 40 elk there at the time. Most of them cows, of course, and there were probably, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 of the bulls. And there was, I would almost describe it as almost barnyardy, kind of a strong barnyard smell. So to me, it wasn't unpleasant, but it was a nice open area, and I wasn't that close either. I was not handling anybody's glands, so it wasn't unpleasant, I didn't think.
Yeah, if you think about the way goats smell, that's probably pretty similar.
Yeah.
And to answer the cow calf question, again, it's really hard to answer that question because we don't see every single critter. And sometimes you can't distinguish when we do these minimum counts, we can't distinguish a calf between a cow because they grow so rapidly. But if you extrapolated it out, it would be about 30 to 100 calves to cow. So, and that is along the lines of a good, healthy population out west. So we're right in the sweet spot, it looks like, just from those kind of basic estimates.
Okay. And you mentioned an injured elk during the presentation. Was there any idea of how that elk had gotten injured?
Yeah, so that was actually, I told you the story about Jeffrey, and that was actually Jeffrey. Jeffrey got hit by a car 3 different times. They hang out on this one particular stretch of road. People fly down the road. So he was originally injured with his front leg. The time that I was looking at, and after that he healed up and he just had a limp. I made jokes about him just kind of having like a cool like gangster limp, and then later on he got hit again on his back leg, and again he was amazingly resilient and was able to get around and move, and the third time that he got hit was just too much and a pretty serious thing, and we had to unfortunately put him down.
Yeah, we had a presentation by someone, I think from your agency, talking about the wildlife crossings that hopefully we can get in Western North Carolina to help with those kind of things. And you used a term at the beginning explaining how the elk were left the area. Was it
Extirpation.
Extirpation. So that is basically hunting them to localized extinction. Is that how you would?
Yeah, that's a pretty good thing. Yeah, so I mean, they were locally extinct, so that was kind of the act of making them extinct is extirpation.
So that was loss of habitat and hunting, basically.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We also had a question for someone. Do you have like an estimate of the number of square miles that have been that are inhabited by the elk? Do you have a number? Yeah,
so I mean that 75,000 square mile number that I mentioned earlier, that's kind of the elk zone, and they pretty much inhabitate, they're pretty much on, I would say 75% of that most of the time. There's woods, they move back and forth, but that's kind of the big area.
Okay. And someone's asking, if not too gruesome, did you leave Jeffrey for nature, or did you take care for nature to take care of, or was his body used for any sort of study on elk?
So anytime an elk dies or we have to put it down, I want to gain as much information as I can from that animal. I want to know about diseases. I want to know about health. So we do something called a necropsy. It's basically like an autopsy for a person, but just, we generally know why the thing dies. But, I look at things like kidney fat, heart fat. We look at things like brain worms, which really are a big issue with elk and can affect them quite a lot. So anyway, so I did that necropsy, tried to understand better how it was doing, and then we buried that elk. I did keep his antlers because he was a beautiful bull. He was on his way down. He was 9 9.5 years old, just a majestic animal. And like I said, he was pretty special to me.
Wow. Wow. I'm glad you have that. The cow that you mentioned kind of beelined it and wanted to go do her own thing and took her peeps with her. Do you worry about having, a lack of genetic diversity when they do that?
No, absolutely. And the lack of genetic diversity is, I think, an issue anyway. When you start with 52 animals, there's a good possibility that there can be a population bottleneck. Fortunately, elk are pretty resistant to that, but I think having such few founding members is probably one of the reasons why that we had such a slow growth. I think right now we're starting to kind of come over the peak, and we're starting to get faster and faster growth, more and more growth. But I mean, if you think about, we started with 52 animals in 2001, and when I started in 2012, we only had about 150. It's really slow. That particular herd with the one that made the beeline, they've been in that same area about 12 to 14 elk, and that's been since 2013. So there's not a lot of growth that we're seeing, and that genetic diversity may be a reason for that. It's also in a bear sanctuary, and bears eat elk calves. So there's probably not one solid reason. There's lots of reasons that slow down elk population growth.
Any plans for any other reintroductions of species that used to be here, like buffalo, I'm thinking?
Not that I know of. I don't think we have the space. Again, buffalo, wide open plains, and we live in a rainforest, so it's not really compatible. I don't think that's going to be on the radar.
Okay. All right. I think that, let me just double check and see if we've got any more questions here. Let's see. Oh, there's someone saying that in Estes Park, Colorado, where the Rocky Mountain National Wildlife Rocky Mountain National Wildlife Park is, a lot of times you just see the elk walking around downtown Estes Park. I know you mentioned that they've come into people's backyards. Do you have them walking down the street anywhere nearby, Bryson City or anything?
Absolutely. So Maggie Valley is one of the spots that they hit. They also go over to Cherokee, and they come out of kind of Lufty, and they're on Cherokee land. So they do the same thing. It's just not the magnitude that Estes Park has. Estes, I mean, they have a ton of elk, and we have 200. So where we may get 2 elk walking down the road, they get 200 elk. So a little bit different scale, but the same kind of issues. All
right. Well, this has been fascinating, and I can't encourage people more to go up there and experience the elk. It is just, it is such a wonderful treat, and I really appreciate you taking the time today to give us this presentation, and hopefully we've whetted some appetites. Jonna posted in the comment section a bugle. If anybody want to hear the bugle call, click on the link and you'll be able to hear the bugle, because to me, it reminds me of whales, kind of the song of the whale. So thank you very much, Justin. I hope everybody will come and join us on Sundays, free donuts for the first 57 people who show up on Sunday. So thank you, everybody. Daniel, do you have any last minute? I hope you'll join us in November.
Yes, matter of fact, if you are coming, bring your gloves, bring some water, and a little bit of good muscle work to be done. We appreciate it. Thanks so much, Justin. Again, reiterate all these good comments as well. Wonderful presentation. Thanks again for having us tonight. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye.